You can record this.
Yeah, I got 100 on my quiz.
Do it again. Will you send it to me so I don't have to do it too?
Alright, so as far as these different regions of the brain in this lab, you only need to know where they're located. You don't need to know what, you'll probably need to know that for a lecture, but in this lab, you only need to know where they are. So, cool, yay. So meninges just refers to different coverings of the brain. It's a fancy word for a covering of the brain. And the only meninge that we're learning is the dura mater. And the dura mater is the outermost covering of the brain. And it's represented here by this kind of clear cellophane looking wrapper on this brain. As you can see, it's not located on this brain anymore. It's been removed. So the dura mater would be only found on this brain since it's already been removed here. So the cellophane looking thing, dura mater, outside covering of the brain. Cool. So then cerebrum. Cerebrum is referring to, and I don't even know if this exactly lines up, but I grabbed two halves so you can get the idea. The cerebrum is this larger portion, whole entire portion of the brain. So we'll be going over this small little part in just a little bit, but this upper more frontal area of the brain, this is all called the cerebrum. And so there's two cerebral hemispheres on either side. You've got your right cerebral hemisphere and your left cerebral hemisphere. And that's split by what's called the longitudinal fissure. If you can see, even on this whole brain, there's still like a central line going through the two hemispheres. So when you cut the brain in half, it's real easy. You just follow that line, and ta-da! It gives you a beautiful section of the brain. So the cerebral cortex is just referring to the surface of the whole cerebrum area. So cerebral cortex is just talking about this outer stuff that you can see. So on the cerebral cortex, you've got kind of these hills and these valleys, these bumps and these squiggly, worm, noodly looking things. So in between these hills, they kind of look like valleys, like little miniature hills and valleys. The valleys are called the sulci. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, so sorry if I'm offending someone somehow. But so this is the sulci. If you think about it, when you're sulking, you're sad, you want to hide, you're sulking, so you sulk in the valleys of the brain, the sulci. Okay? It helps me remember. So then these hills, or the little puffy, noodly looking things, the top, the actual puffy part, is called the gyri, or the gyri, or the uri. If you like gyros, you can pronounce it that way, sure. So on the cerebral cortex, you have the sulci, gyri, etc. You can see kind of all around this brain. Alright, so we already talked about, so these next four, the different lobes, those words should stand out. We learned, remember, frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal bones in the cranium, and guess what? These lobes all refer to the same areas but on the brain. So like the frontal lobe would be kind of this general area, the front part of the brain. This one's got a little, So frontal, parietal is kind of like the upper back half. Temporal is if you thought about where's the sheep's ear, kind of this temporal region. And then occipital would be, remember, it's kind of the back bottom. So occipital. So I wouldn't be confusing and pin it somewhere where it could be in between. If it's like definitely up here, it'd be like parietal. If it's definitely up here, frontal, etc. I'm going to not try to put the pin like directly in the middle where one turns together. That's evil. So just know the general areas of where the different lobes are. And I'm not sure why corpus callosum is added with number 2, because the corpus callosum you can't see unless you cut the brain in half. And what that's referring to is, you notice this kind of lighter colored, creamy looking alien head, the movie's Aliens. That's what it looks like. I don't know if y'all can see this. See this alien looking head? Kind of does this weird thing. That's the corpus callosum. And no, I won't test over this, but it could be an extra credit question is, I mean, yes, you need to know where the corpus callosum is, but what the corpus callosum actually does is it allows the right side of your brain to talk to the left side of your brain. So we actually have like capabilities of doing higher thinking than a lot of other animals because we have a very developed corpus callosum. So thankfully our brain's giving signals back and forth, whereas in more primitive species their corpus callosum is hardly there, if it, you know, is at all. So this lighter alien looking head, so I could pin it anywhere along this. Diencephalon just refers to kind of this mid-region of the brain and everything underneath it. So usually I don't pin something, I can't really pin the diencephalon because it's, you know, a smattering of different regions of the brain. It's just kind of a collective term for where all of these fall under. So thalamus. Thalamus is kind of the perfect circle that looks like it's sticking underneath the alien head, underneath the corpus callosum. So it does kind of look like a perfect circle nestled up there underneath that alien head. So that's the thalamus. Hooray. So that one's pretty recognizable. The pineal gland. The pineal gland kind of looks like it's taking a piggyback ride off the thalamus. It's small. It kind of looks like the size of a pea. It's tiny. Pineal gland. Awesome. So that's the little pineal gland. Not to be confused with the pituitary gland. So we have 2 glands. They both start with P, so make sure you don't confuse them. The pituitary gland is on the underside of the brain, and it's found kind of directly in the middle. This kind of yummy blob that I just pinned is called the pituitary gland. And it's really only seen if you have the dura mater attached. If you notice, like in this cut brain where the dura mater is no more, the pituitary gland isn't there. So it kind of gets removed, it's held on to the brain via the dura mater. So if the dura mater is still attached and I pin something on the underside of the brain, chances are it's probably the pituitary gland. Cool. So optic chiasma, I like the optic chiasma. I think it's cool. It reminds me of X-Men. I don't know why. No, actually I do, because it looks like an X. And if I were to pin this middle part, so it's on the underside of the brain, it's a little bit more anterior than where the pituitary gland would sit if it were still here, right here. But it's it kind of looks like this X, like a lighter colored X on the underside of the brain. So that's optic chiasma. So then moving on to brainstem. So brainstem is just referring to kind of these lower, more, I guess, dorsal or back portion of the brain. For us, it's more of the lower portion. So midbrain. Midbrain is kind of a fun one. I usually like to quiz it because students remember it. Midbrain, if you pull this, which we're going to get what this is called in a minute, we're going to get to that. If you pull this down, it kind of looks like a butt is mooning you. This butt is called the midbrain. This butt is not doing so well because it's been pulled a lot. So you see it looks like a little butt is mooning you in there. That's called the midbrain. Ta-da. The pons is kind of the bulge on the front part of the brainstem, which this is kind of brainstem area, correct? So this front bulge kind of coming down is called the pons. Bulge kind of sticking out is called the medulla oblongata. And yes, feel free to do Waterboy references by any means. So medulla oblongata, bulge sticking off the brainstem. How we named this whole top part the cerebrum. Well, guess what? There's a word that sounds very, very similar to it. And this second part, also known as the little brain, kind of looks like a cauliflower, is known as the cerebellum. So just be aware that those words sound a lot alike. Cerebrum, cerebellum. I often have to refresh because those words are so similar, I get them confused. But so this is the cerebellum. It's like the little brain off the back side. You cut open the cerebellum, and it looks actually really pretty. True, I'm a girl, so maybe I'm biased. But the inside of the cerebellum is called the arbor vitae. And the arbor vitae actually means tree of life. And it does. If you get close enough, it looks like a tree. And so if I pin the inside of the cerebellum like so, the correct answer would be arbor vitae. True, I would give you a point for cerebellum. But if I'm pinning the outside, then that would be cerebellum. Because you're not looking at the tree of life, you're not looking at the arbor vitae. So does that make sense? Cool. So then moving on to ventricles. So actually I need that. The lateral ventricle. So ventricles are a little interesting. They're actually more spaces than exact locations in the brain. They're kind of areas where fluid and other things are able to be transported. But I can still pin these two because I can kind of pin the open spaces. So lateral ventricle is referring to kind of the open space that's within the corpus callosum. So if I pin the open space in the alien head, the corpus callosum, I'm talking about the lateral ventricle. So as you can see, there's kind of a space in the alien head that I've pinned, and that's, if this were still a whole brain and hadn't been cut, and we bend it back, remember to look at the butt, to look at the midbrain, the kind of space right above the midbrain, right above the butt, is called the third ventricle to the open space, you know. And so if that's the case, you know it's a ventricle immediately. And this one is the third ventricle.